Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Well done for turning up. I've got no time, like the previous people, and too much to say, but my name's Duncan BakerBrown. I'm a practicing architect, academic, and climate activist, and I've been in this sort of world for about 35 years. And yeah, I think this is where we are at the moment. What I wanted to talk about is resource consumption and how to avoid it. But humans, 10 years ago, were responsible for extracting between 45 and 65 billion tons of stuff from the planet every year. And recently, that's doubled. We're up to about 135 billion tons of stuff. And, well, why does that matter for us in the room? Well, the construction sector consumes 50% of that 135 billion tons every year. And it's the environmental catastrophe associated with that that the other guys just mentioned, which we really need to be made aware of more of. In the UK, we consume 600 billion tons of stuff every year and create 200 million tons of waste a year. The construction sector is responsible for over 63% of that waste stream. That's 120 million tons of stuff the construction sector throws away every year. Now, in the rest of Europe, the construction sector's responsible for between 35 and 45% of the total waste. So in the UK, it's 63%. We are more wasteful. And the construction sector is also responsible for about 45% of all emissions, if you think of the design, construction, occupation, maintenance, and destruction of the built environment. So humankind needs to learn how to manage planet Earth's resources more responsibly, and it's us in the room that can do that. Designers and constructors, we decide what things are made of, and we specify them. And at the moment, we do it without understanding where stuff comes from and where it ends up, and the impact of our decisions. So it's about managing resources and dramatically reducing the need to consume new raw materials. We need to decouple from the mines and forests. The challenges, well, we exist as a linear take, make, and throw away society at the moment. The whole of humankind does, basically. So some good news. We're in a very impactful industry. If you design a 10-meter by 10-meter concrete slab and you make it 50 millimeters skinnier than normal, you'll save as much carbon as avoiding meat for the year. And the good news is, in my world, everyone's asking, what is a circular economy? How do we do it? People are winning prizes saying retrofit is not only the right thing to do, it's the more interesting thing to do, which is correct. Would you win a Pritzker Prize, the biggest prize in architecture in the world, with that attitude a few years ago? No. And students are demanding to be taught the right stuff. And they're not being taught the right stuff everywhere. Some places are doing it. Obviously, where I teach, University of Brighton, have been doing it for years. But the industry needs to learn the right stuff. And people are in prison at the moment in the name of retrofitting our housing in this country. So resource security is a thing of the past. We need to close all mines. There's a copper mine anywhere, part of your supply chain. We need to reuse the previously manufactured. We need to mine the anthroposphere, or the Anthropocene. We need to reuse the previously manufactured, the stuff you're sitting on, you're wearing, you're within. The plastic in our oceans, landfill sites, cities. And that gives the natural world a break. We saw that with the first lockdown in COVID, where the natural world suddenly could breathe, suddenly could be seen, and suddenly could creep back and participate in life with us. And we actually know what to do. The RIBA, I sit in the RIBA's National Council. I'm chair of the Climate Action Expert Advisory Group, and I'm not going to COP next week. But the RIBA is going to set mandatory climate literacy tests for all its 48,000 members next year. The UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard, I hope, is going to be really impactful. It's going to be a set of rules. It was launched a couple of weeks ago that we take to the relevant minister and say, we as a construction sector know how to keep within that 1.5 degree rise. We've got Part Z. That is going to enable that, which will create that. So this is a bill that's been presented to the UK Parliament on 3 occasions to legislate for embodied carbon. As soon as you're folding in whole life carbon and embodied carbon, which means understanding the amount of resources that go in to make the thing, not just operational carbon, we'll be in the world of reuse. Everyone's getting their circular economy route maps now. It's one for London on the left, one for Brighton on the right. They are really impactful already. And cities are providing us with hope. because most stuff flows into cities, whether that's water, energy, people, clothes, food, or building materials. It flows in and flows out in a matter of moments. And if you start getting those flows to talk to each other, you turn those linear systems into circular systems. And cities are, after all, material stores for the future. And we all need to become urban miners searching for new material sources that reduce the need for natural raw materials. This is something I did 10 years ago. It's 55 tons of rubbish, otherwise known as the Brighton Waste House, which is actually a 2-story teaching facility constructed by over 360 students and apprentices and young people. And it's, like I said, made out of rubbish. It performs to Passive House standards, and it's an ongoing research project. And we've had really quite a number of research projects since it, and this is one of the most impactful because it ran for about 7 years. It's the FCRBE project, looking into 6 countries doing reuse, deconstruction and reuse, and particularly how to reuse those deconstructed elements. And if you look on the website, there are 20 guides to how to deconstruct buildings of different vintages and how to reuse those components. And I also curated a summer school as part of that. The original summer school in 2020, before lockdown happened, was going to be in person, 80 students from across 6 European countries. And we were going to actually be reassessing, reappraising a deconstructed building. So Brighton Hove City Council were going to deconstruct a building they had or expected to demolish, and they were going to pack up the materials in a playground of this school that was mothballed. We were going to be there for 3 weeks with some of the biggest thought leaders, best-known thought leaders in the world of deconstruction and reuse, and just reappraise that material. And then really interestingly, the city were going to put that material out into their supply chain to see if anybody would look at it, anybody would touch it. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we did the online version. But it meant that our students could come from across the world. So we had students from South America, North America, Europe, through to China. It was incredible. And we made a book about it, which has been, and because it's Interreg EU funded, it's open source and free, so you can download a free copy. It's got 28 essays in it, including an amazing essay by Scott McCauley of the Anthropocene Architecture School, who's from Paisley. Yeah, who clapped? Go on, clap for Scott. Woo. Is Scott in the room? Where is he? Hey! I said I'd mention it. Some more good news. Scott's in the room. No. Yeah, I've done another book, and I'm going to be selling it at cost in a minute. Anyway, so it's the second edition of the Reuse Atlas, which has 40 case studies of projects dealing with recycling. Pretty boring. It's not that brilliant thing to do. Reuse, reduce, and actually closed-loop systems. And if you look at the number of case studies, most are with the circular economy. The book was delayed by 3 years because every time I interviewed someone for their case study, they'd say, well, this is all right, but I'm doing another 2 or 3. It's really expanding and really exciting. So I'm going to run you through that. How many more minutes have I got? None. Oh, loads. Oh, right, okay. Right. Slow down. Imi, do you want to get back on the stage? There's a couple more things you want to say. Step 1, recycling. It is pretty good if you're stopping waste. There's a company called Again, which is a startup. It's been going for about 18 months. It's Danish. It was set up by the Lendiger Group, who are architects, who deal with reuse, and I'll be showing you their work in a minute. But this company go into factories creating products for our supply chain, and they look at the linear way they do it, and their ambition is to turn those linear systems into circular ones. And so they have a website on the circular version of maybe Juncker's flooring or whatever it is. So the stuff we normally specify for our projects, they're doing the closed-loop version. Really interesting. This is a house I was working on, which unfortunately burnt down on the top of the South Downs. I'm from Brighton. So we've got the South Downs just north of us. On the top of the South Downs, this house unfortunately burnt down. So we were asked to design a new house in the South Downs National Park. And this thing is just a wreck. Our challenge was to reuse that, reprocess that. And so the way we work, I practice, I'm in practice as well as teaching, is we do what Superuse from Rotterdam used to call a harvest map. We call it a resource map. We look at the resources on site, in the neighborhood, and in the region. Now, they may be material resources, they can be human resources as well. That sounds a bit clinical, but what we're looking at is networks, a bit like what the previous people were talking about. There's energies and knowledge that can recreate places. So this is the site. Now, the South Downs National Park, without going into it in too much detail, they didn't want us to build another big bungalow like the one that had caught fire and burnt. They wanted the building to be partially earth-sheltered, it's south-facing, and what was really interesting is they demanded that we chop down the 85 trees that were on site. And that's because they're non-indigenous invasive species. They've been there for 75 years, but the first thing that the public saw, because this is right next to the South Downs Way, was 85 trees being felled and then a quarry. And all in the name of sustainability. So what you're looking at there is our contractors grading the chalk, because we're on chalk. And that's it graded on the right-hand side. And we turned that chalk into plaster for the building. This is the blockwork, the burnt-out house, crushed and turned into windowsills for the building. There's the windowsill. Bricks are from 4 miles away, lime mortar in the bricks. We tried making the lime mortar out the chalk on site, but it was too much burning. And that's the reality of it. If you burn chalk, you create quicklime. Then out of that, you can create lime mortar. But we actually paid for lime mortar anyway to come off-site. But those bricks, if you use lime mortars, then the bricks have got an embodied carbon footprint. They'll last for thousands of years. We looked at the burnt bricks from the building, and we polished some of them, actually, and we were going to use them as a floor finish. And unfortunately, we didn't get enough. So we used the burnt bricks, we crushed them like normal, and they became the windowsills. But what you're looking at on the right-hand side are samples of the clay and chalk from site, the different colors just from site, that we use for the walls of the building. The other thing that happened is what we've had in the southeast, and I think it's gone across the whole of the UK now, is ash dieback. So thousands and thousands of trees, hundreds of thousands of trees are being felled at the moment because they've got ash dieback, and nearly all of them are being chipped and burnt. And we had a project where these trees here had ash dieback, and they were going to be chipped and burnt. But we salvaged them because look at the timber. So we looked at them, we got someone that knew better than I did to look at them, and they got them sawn, and it's beautiful timber. Most of this is being burnt at the moment. So if you've got carbon locked, keep it locked, don't burn. And we designed this pavilion that was using the ash dieback. The back wall is actually made in partnership with a company called Biome, who do mycelium insulation. It hasn't got accreditation yet, but mycelium is incredible. It's an incredible, it's going to be a huge industry. Mycelium products are already out there in packaging. Mycelium is fungi root that consumes organic matter, and you can turn it into insulation. Or in this case, it's the back wall of this building. And that's food waste from the client's site. So this was actually Glyndebourne Opera House. And it was a pavilion for them, and it was bricks from their site, second-hand bricks, mycelium products on the wall, ash dieback. Unfortunately, because of lockdown, that pavilion didn't get built, but we'd got the timber. So that went on hold. But that timber became the roof trusses of the building I was just showing you. So that's ash dieback, that's ash dieback, that's broken up bricks on the floor in the screed, that's clay from the site on the walls, ash dieback trusses. Bricks, lime, ash. Ash staircase. That was all going to be burnt. That was going to be burnt. So, posh house, big house, fucking big house. Didn't cost more money though. Okay, posh people can afford to be green. But this is Rota. You may or may not know Rota, based in Brussels. I've worked with them for the last 10 years. They deconstruct buildings other people throw away. These slides you read from the top left to the bottom right. They're part of the team deconstructing part of the World Trade Center in Brussels, which is being rebuilt and adapted, but mainly retrofit. But where they're taking it down to adapt it, they're unpacking it and selling it on. You can see it's on their website. They're part of the big team doing that. I love this. This is what we have to do with buildings that we normally demolish, okay? This storyboard is your guide, our guide. You start with the building top left that's decrepit and beyond retrofit. And then you measure it carefully, understand its resource, deconstruct it, play around with it, and reassemble it in a different way. There's the building. It's a school building on an island in Rotterdam. They did a deep sort of 3D model of it, did a flatbed routed model of it in ply. They did a 3D printed model of it. It's for school children. They got the school kids to play around with this. Came up with different shapes. There's the new building made out of the old building. Entopia building in Cambridge. Former telephone exchange turned into a building that needs humans. They spent a lot of time on the windows to get natural lighting. Great. I'm not that interested in that, or the solar panels. I'm interested in this. What a lot of people don't know about is Cat A, Cat B fit-outs in commercial buildings. It's the temporary fit-out to get the punters into those tower blocks in the City of London and other places like that. Those fit-outs look like proper interiors because they are proper interiors. They last for maybe 3 or 4 months if the punters have come in and said, yes, we'll have that space. But if you're Apple or any commercial building, you want it branded your own way, so that stuff gets torn out. That's one of the reasons the UK construction sector has got such a high waste stream. This stuff, the way this building's fitted out, is from a building in the center of London that was fitted out. Instead of throwing out that temporary installation, they took it out a bit more slowly and reinstalled it there. This is Cleveland Steel, who've been procuring second-hand steel and surplus steel from the oil industry for 45 years. They're now doing normal I-beams in the construction sector, and this is a building they needed. It was in Dublin, a light industrial shed in Dublin, in Ireland. They deconstructed it and reassembled it in Yorkshire, and by doing that, by faffing around with that, locating it, deconstructing it, reassembling it, they saved £1 million on a £5 million building. This is the stuff they've been procuring for 45 years, and they give warranty to it. Steel from the oil industry going to the construction sector, and this stuff goes to make stadiums, like the Spurs football team stadium, the West Ham's one, Anfield. Tubular section stuff is surplus oil pipeline. But what you see in the foreground is the new stuff on the right. Deconstructed steel frames from existing buildings in the UK. They give you a warranty for this now, because they've been given a warranty on second-hand steel for 45 years. They are the pathfinders. Other people are now, because these guys give a warranty on second-hand steel, they will. This is the Lendiger Group, which is actually pronounced Leninger, from Denmark, and they're all pathfinders, and they're well known for certain circular economy practices in building, but this is really interesting. An existing school building on the left, which was up for demolition, they deconstructed it and made a new school building. And this is the design details of the new school building, where they're using a 100-year-old truss and they're upgrading it to take the loads of nowadays. So there's the deconstruction of the building, the different material palettes, different material building ages, unpacking these buildings. There's the new buildings made out of the old buildings. So we also need the digital tools and databases, and they are emerging. This is a 3D resource map of the Netherlands, not the Netherlands, of Amsterdam by Metabolic. If you own a bit of land there, or you're part of a community that own it, they can tell you what you've got in terms of the DNA of your building from the point of view of its resource potential. This is the sort of granular detail that informs that, a 3D sort of Revit-type program of a hospital, part of a hospital complex in Amsterdam. It's measured the quality and the type of all the components of the building, including the steel frame that's currently for sale. If someone buys it, this building won't be demolished, it will be deconstructed. No customer, it gets demolished. This is a similar drawing and program and data, but this is a demolition company doing the same thing because they're rebranding themselves as a deconstruction company, doing the same thing. This is a network in the Netherlands of deconstruction companies doing that stuff all over the Netherlands because they've got zero waste targets for 2035. So reducing retrofit has to be a lot more than external wall insulation and solar panels. Creative retrofit and adaptive reuse is a huge opportunity. It's been discussed before me. I've probably got, 2 minutes? I've still got 7. I added up. That's 9 minutes. Great. So this is what we need to do. We can't afford to wrap the built environment in insulation. This is the way forward. The building on the left was up for demolition 10 years ago in Paris. It's a residential housing block. There it is afterwards. The mayor of Paris had the 35 million euros put aside, and they were about to demolish it, and L'Aquitaine of Versailles went to the mayor and said, we'll give you your new building for 2/3 the cost. So all they did is take off the 1970s concrete facade and bolt on a winter garden, which is basically a new room, which has got 2 layers of full-height sliding double-glazed doors. And it's unheated. And it's got a balcony. And it's got internal blinds so you don't get glare in the winter from sun, and it's got external balcony that shades you for excessive heat in the summer. There are those winter gardens being bolted on. The community didn't leave the tower. As was really underlined in the previous presentation, Retrofit can keep communities intact and then empower communities to take ownership of it. They've got their luxury tower without having to move out. That's before and after. So the before and after is, afterwards you've got natural ventilation, control over your environment. You don't have to put lights on during the day. You've got this unheated environmental buffer zone that insulates you, reduced bills. This is just good design. And I'm going to end here. 1 minute. End here. I end here because this is #1 Triton Square in the business district of London. This building was 19 years old, up for demolition. It was retrofitted and extended instead of demolished. And one of the reasons they were able to do the next point is because the supply chain was intact, because they're tearing these buildings down so quickly that the people that specified the stuff in the beginning are still around. But in this case, with positive effect, 9 stories of curtain wall system were carefully taken down. I thought I had a slide of it, but I don't. Carefully taken down, cleaned up in a car park in Watford, and then upgraded and hung back up with another 15-year warranty on them. So these guys are doing it as well as who you'd expect to do it. And I'm going to end on that point there. We do have a session later this afternoon where I'll be talking about other case studies, because there's a lot of people doing this now. So getting the warranties on second-hand stuff. But really understanding that we can do this is the biggest big deal. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Duncan. We've got some time for questions. You take a seat.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We've got a couple of minutes for questions. That was excellent. Thank you. So many fascinating case studies around, particularly reuse and circular. But if we scan this, the QR code and start to put some questions in, but one Duncan, I have for you is right at the beginning. You mentioned, integrating this into the curriculum within universities. You're currently doing that, and obviously it does happen in pockets. How do you see it kind of becoming more mainstream, or what do we need to do to get that across the
Well,
country?
I think events like this do it. I think when younger people see that there's a lot going on in the area, and there's lots of really, amazing projects that are happening. If you can shine a light on those, then you just need the skills to be able to get involved. But the fact is, actually, a lot of these projects are more engaging with communities, which include younger people and students. But I do think things are happening. But for me, that's why I mentioned the RIBA having their climate literacy test. I just think with that sort of thing going on, because that will be for the older people like me who are set in their ways, still teaching the old school way, basically. I have a role at the University of Brighton, which is climate literacy champion, and it's not really for the kids. It's really to try and make sure that the curriculum is changed. So I think we need to work at core curriculum and values and really test the values, because every organization, every academic organization has all its sustainability statements in place, but it's actually acting on those and really drilling down and making sure the curriculum's changed. But I do actually think things are changing, because there's students that are winning prizes, etc., getting light shined on their work. It's often retrofit projects now.
It's really starting to come through.
Yeah,
no, definitely. Taking some questions. If we want to see materials in our retrofit projects reused, where do we start?
Where do we start?
Broad.
Buy my book. But That's why I did the book. There's 40 case studies in it of people doing it in different ways. So I think there's all sorts of organisations having a go at it. I think until we get the legislation to enable it and encourage it and create a stable retrofit industry, as it were, it's always going to be a bit sort of hit and miss, and there's going to be pathfinders that have the guts to do it.
Yeah.
But why I'm quite excited about the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard is that if it's saying this is what you have to do to meet the 1.5 degree benchmark, and you're going to be reusing and adapting to that. If you're bringing in new materials, you're never going to meet your whole life carbon budget. So I think I'm really excited about that because that's across the whole industry.
Yeah.
Everyone's bought into it. So you apply those rules and you'll meet it, but then you'll suddenly realize you've got to know a lot more about retrofit and reuse.
Yeah, no, definitely. And again, the question I was going to ask has disappeared. So how can you incentivise local authority clients to take the risk an adaptive reuse project as they're traditionally risk adverse in their approach? And it was similar to the previous question, which was around demolition and avoiding it.
I'd turn it around. I think local authorities are not so risk adverse. I glanced over because I didn't have a lot of time, but there's a lot of circular economy route maps in cities across the country. And for example, in Brighton, where we have one, we've just built 65 affordable homes, social homes, and it's 5 stories high, and they're steel frame bolted together. It's one of the case studies I'll show this afternoon, quite a sort of ordinary housing scheme. But everything else in the southeast of England is poured concrete at the moment. And it's because there's 2 contractors that do it. And they buck the trend, and it didn't cost more money or anything. It's just it was in the brief from the beginning. So get these principles in the brief at the beginning, and they just sort of roll through.
Yeah, that's that's a thing we were discussing yesterday around new builds, but it was get it in the brief at the early stages. And we've done a lot of work at Best and with working with Hub North and Hub West around their communities and the work and how do we ensure that we're kind of supporting that community work, but also the client effectively around the reuse of buildings.
If it's in the brief at the beginning, it will roll through the project. I mean, it will be quite a thing for a contractor to say, I'm not going to do it like that, I'm going to give you the high carbon option. And you'll just say, well, that's not what we're looking for.
Yeah, brilliant. We'll keep going with the questions. Is it more expensive to repurpose and rebuild like this? If so, how do we, if we can, tip the scales to make the cheaper option?
Okay, I try and point you in the direction of people that save money by doing this. That's why I mentioned Cleveland Steel. They save 20% by doing it. But I tend to say, as a rule, you don't save money by doing this. This is systems change we're talking about. You know, why would you expect in any other industry to do wholesale systems change and it instantly be saving you money? I think if more of us do it, and it's more, if the local authorities, central and national government are incentivizing it. By the way, the fossil fuel industry doesn't make any sense commercially. It's hugely subsidized. And we just nod away to that. You know, our money goes to that, yeah? So at the moment, we're subsidizing that industry instead of insulating our homes. So it's actually the same amount of money. That's what the people that spoke before me, I'm nodding just at everything they said. So I just think it's about redistributing the money that we create by paying our taxes, etc. For me, but also it can be the cost-effective way, because from a quantity surveying point of view, quantity surveyors, when they say how much a building is going to cost based on the quantum of labour and materials, there's a lot of wastage allowed for, and we're just used to that. Now, if you start really measuring how much it takes to construct a building of a certain type, you'll reduce the amount of materials you'll buy, because whether you're using modern methods of construction or whatever it is, there'll be less resources going into your building. So surely that saves money. We should be saving money by doing it. It's more about creating awareness. And I think that's what I'm quite excited about now, where have you got I'll say again, the net zero carbon building standard, that just being a thing, 500 people working on that for nothing for 3 years. It's out there now. So I just think we're going to have the legislative landscape that we need.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't think it should be costing more money, but I don't think we should be expecting it to save us money as we transition into it.
Brilliant, thank you. Ben's asked a question, is there a single repository for all these reuse providers UK-wide?
It is a bit like that. There's lots of things I mean, why am I up here in Scotland? I live in Brighton, yeah? It's because things like this is it.
Yep.
This is it at the moment. There are lots of things trying to happen. It's really great. I mean, I'm quite interested. For me, I'm old enough to remember the high-tech architects in the late 70s and early 80s. They didn't have the supply chain to make the buildings that they designed. So they invented the supply chain. They created the paneling systems that they needed. We are, as you can see today, creating the supply chain. And that's what needs to happen. And once we get the legislation on board and the bureaucrats involved, then it will just start flowing.
Brilliant. We've had some really quick-fire round questions there thrown at you, but we'll go for
Don't ask the plasterboard
one. I know, I'm avoiding that one. We'll just go for the top one again. What is the UK potential for reuse of buildings versus the needed volume of new buildings? Can we construct 1.5 million, not 1.5 metres, 5 million new homes from existing buildings?
Well, according to statistics that are out there readily available, we've got about 500,000 vacant homes anyway, so we start with those. I think we look at how buildings are occupied before we do need to build new homes, but actually what we need, without the building word, we need affordable homes, and they might be buildings we already have. So I think we need to look at our building stock. I mean, what's really interesting is when you look at the amount of empty buildings just across the UK, it's vast. So you start with the anthroposphere, which is the existing built environment, and you look at creative ways of occupying that. And then when you've got no more of that, you start building.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We're starting with vacant homes, reuse, circular systems change. Thank you so much, Duncan. That was amazing.